Hello, 7th graders, and welcome to our first lesson of Unit 11. We are moving into Unit 11, like I just said, which Unit 11 is all ways on how we can represent data. So we took a lot of look at data here in this last unit, so in Unit 10, and how do we use these different measurements that we're talking about. In this unit, we're going to talk about how we can represent these data using different kinds of charts, graphs, different ways to show those. So we're going to talk about histograms today. And if you ever remember on my back wall in my classroom where I show you all of your like test scores and so on. If you looked at the top on how I show out your NWA scores, most of them had been just for 8th grade, just because that's what I had started with. But you would have noticed that those were an example of a histogram, okay? So they kind of end up looking a lot like bar graphs, but the way that they're different is they're used by justifying or using a frequency. Okay, so for instance, I was using like, okay, you had a score from 230 to 235. Okay, so anyone who fell in that range was then added into that bar. So that's basically what a histogram is. So our objectives are I can make histograms and I can use histograms to analyze data. Don't worry about our warm-up. We're just going to continue on. All right, so an essential question, how can you use intervals, tables, and graphs to organize data? So this is what we're going to be looking at. We're talking about those intervals. So like I was saying with like your MWA scores, so something between like, okay, 230 and 235. That's what they mean by those intervals. Your tables are tables that you've seen before. So what might happen is that we're presented with a table of data and we have to use intervals to make it into a graph, okay? And graphs. So this is where we're going to set up a graph. We're going to create, I mean, this is kind of slanted, but we're going to make kind of some bar graph kind of looking thing, okay? So I'm going to explain the difference though between a bar graph as well as a histogram when we go through here. All right. So here is what a histogram is. So a histogram is a bar graph. So it's a type of bar graph that shows the frequency of data values in intervals of the same size. So what they mean is they're showing an interval. So in this case, this is, okay, CDs owned. This is the number of CDs owned, and this is how many times people voted. So that means that 4 people own between 0 to 9 CDs. It means that 3 people own between 10 to 19 CDs. 1 person owns between 20 and 29, and 2 people own between 30 and 39 CDs. I don't know anyone who still collects CDs, but maybe your parents have a whole bunch of CDs around. Now you could go through and look through them. Sometimes you find some cool music. So that's what they mean by those intervals. They also say that the intervals of the same size. So in this case, you're going from 0 to 9. So that's a range of about 10 different values because 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 10 values. So the same thing's going to happen here. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. This also is showing me 10 different values. So every time you set those up, they're supposed to have the same amount of values shown within each little bar here. So the height of the bar represents the frequency or the values of the interval. Yes, so I also explained that. That means that 4 people voted that they have between 0 and 9, so on. The other thing that's a little bit different about histograms than bar graphs is that in a typical bar graph, let's see if it'll let me write. Okay. In a typical bar graph, you're going to see something that kind of looks like this. Okay, and then this. Maybe then this. Okay. Bar graphs have a space in between each little bar. Okay. Because these are usually your bars, so on. They have a space in between them. Histograms, as you can see here, do not. If you are adding spaces in between your bars here, that is not a histogram. Histograms go one right next to each other. Don't even leave space in between, okay? Because it goes from 0 to 9, it cuts right to 10. So why would I leave space when I would have basically a normal number line down here if it wasn't for the fact that I'm using frequencies, or sorry, I'm using intervals, okay? Let's go ahead and look at some examples. So example 1, it says the frequency table shows the number of laps that people in a swim class completed today. Display the table in a histogram. So like I said, you might be given a table because they're talking about in your essential question. So they gave us the table and they gave us the frequencies. What we need to do is we need to set up a graph. So I'm going to start by setting up a graph, and it's okay not to have graph paper for this. We'll just make it as best as we can on our notes here. So the biggest thing about setting up your histograms, and if you notice about this one, is there's a title as well as they have labels for your X and your Y variables. You need to make sure anytime you make a histogram, you do the same for yours. So in this case, let's see, so they're talking about how a CD owns. I would say I maybe label this laps in swim class. Okay. Down at the bottom here, then I would talk about, let's see how they name it, number of I just say number of laps, and I'd say frequency over here. So maybe I'll just abbreviate it with number of laps. And then I know that it's hard for me to write sideways here, but I would write this one as frequency. Ooh, that really does not spell out real. But let's go ahead and we are going to create some intervals. So we are looking between 1 to 3, 4 to 6, 7 to 9, 10 to 12, 13 to 15. So it looks to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've got about 5, so I want to section this into about 5 different spots. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's okay if I've got extra space down here. I don't have to use it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to label this part as 1 to 3. This part's going to be 4 to 6. This part can be 7 to 9. This part's 10 to 12. And this part can be my 13 to 15. So all I'm doing right now is setting up this graph. It takes a little bit of time, and that's okay. So let's go. I think I might go up by increments of 2 on this line. So let's go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. We'll just go up to 14 because I don't think, I mean, the highest one is 11, but we'll 13. All right, I'm going to try and pick a different color here. Let's go green. Okay. So what then I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at, they have the number of laps here is 1 to 3 and my frequency is 11. So with this one from 1 to 3, I'm going to go into 11, which looks to be, in between my 10 and 12 here. As straight as I can, bring it down. All right, there's 1 bar. So then I go from 4 to 6, that's 4. So I'm going to find my 4, bring it over, down. Again, I'm trying to be as straight as I can. Sometimes it's a little hard on here. From 9 to 7, it's 0, so I don't even have to add anything. This is where I would have a gap, and that's okay. From 10 to 12, I have 3, so that's going to be in between that 2 and that 4. And then 13 to 15 is 6. So I'd probably say, I'm going to bring this up to about 6. And bring it up. Feel free to coloring them in, or you can leave them uncolored in as well. That's okay too. Okay, and that's what my histogram is going to look like. So make sure you have labels on your X and your Y. Make sure you've got your numbers out, okay, and your frequencies here. Remember that your bars are going to be right next to each other. In the case you have a 0, though, there will be a gap, as you can see here. Okay. All right, so I want you to try and set up a histogram here on your own, okay? So it says this frequency table shows the ages of people riding a roller coaster. Display the data in a histogram. So go ahead and try and set one up. If you need to go back through the notes, look at this, you can. Make sure you've got labels, titles and labels. They're going to be important, okay? Go ahead, pause the video. When you get back, I will have the answer ready for you. Alrighty, coming on back. Here is my table. I hope that, or sorry, your histogram. I hope that yours looks very similar to mine. So here's how I set mine up. Here's my age ranges. So again, making sure they're just kind of distance here. I know they got a little sloppy. My writing on this thing is, I'm not quite used to it yet. Your frequency then, again, I went up by increments of 2. If you wanted to go by increments of 1, you can. It's totally up to you. I just didn't want to write out as many numbers. And my title is Ages on Roller Coaster. Okay. So as I can notice in looking at my data now, I can see that a lot more people are younger who are ending up on this roller coaster. But then there's also like a spike of people at 70 or 50, 59. Maybe they're feeling adventurous again as they got older. Do you think, leave a comment below, do you think it's going to get bigger even as it goes longer? Do you think 60s and 70s are going to be more, or do you think it's just a random spike at 50? Okay, feel free to color them in. Again, make sure that your data, your bars here are right next to each other. There should be no gaps at all in between yours. All right, I think we've got like a couple more examples. Just want to make sure that we've got enough time. Let's go ahead and start looking at this. We might be able to do part 1 or like A and B, and we might need to trail into the next video. This one says the histogram shows the winning speed at the Daytona 500. A, which interval contains the most data values? So here's one question. Oof, that was not very straight. How many of the winning speeds are less than 140 miles per hour? And C, how many of the winning speeds are at least 160 miles per hour? I think we might be able to finish this one. So we've just got some questions we need to do by looking at this data and figuring out some of these numbers. So A says which interval contains the most data. So I'm looking for the highest frequency. That's going to be my most data. So as I can see, my highest data looks to be here. So that is my interval range of 150 to 159. Okay, so we're just interpreting the graph here. We didn't have to make it. We're just going to take a look at it. How many of the winning speeds are less than 140 miles per hour? So I want things that are less than 140. So anything that's smaller, which are going to be these two. So this part and this part. So I would say this one's at 4. So that range, this one right here. And honestly, this one, it's not halfway, so I wouldn't say 2. So maybe 1. So my guess would be 5. 5 of them made it at a winning speed of less than 140 miles. Yeah. All right, and C, how many of the winning speeds are at least 160 miles per hour? So that means they want 160 or more. So in this case, I'm going to be looking at these two down here. So in this one, I would say it's almost to 8, but not quite 8. So I'd probably say this is 7. In this one, I'd say it's maybe in between 4 and 8. I think that's what it kind of looks like. So maybe like, maybe 6. So we could say 13. I'd take 13 or 12. Okay? Catch you in part 2. See you then. Oops, all right, or 12.